I want to make a game that takes the fighting mechanics from my game Gladihoppers and combines them with more large-scale gameplay systems from games such as Mountain Blade and Gangsters Organized Crime. So I recreated overworld movement and interaction features from Spartacus War, which is a game mode inspired by Mountain Blade that I released for Gladihoppers last year. The idea is that you walk around and interact with other characters and locations, gaining experience by defeating enemies and completing simple quests in order to acquire new gear and upgrade your character. So using scriptable objects, I've created a rudimentary dialogue system that can trigger certain events. At the moment you can only talk, trade and initiate a fight. But with this system, I can add lots of other events in the future. For the fight scene, I decided to try out a more physics-based combat mechanic by mixing the character controller from Gladihoppers with the one from Soccer is Football, which is another game I made a while back. While it's admittedly pretty fun to play, I'm most likely going to change it since I think it's too silly for the art style and the overall mood that I'm going for with this game. Speaking of the art style, the initial concept for the character and tileset art was made by Magic Bird, but everything new that you'll see from now on will instead be created by Waterwitch and her team of artists. So when the first batch of these new assets arrived, I brought them into the game and again used scriptable objects to keep the content organized. This is useful because I can then also specify certain conditions for equipment such as helmets that for example might need to hide the facial hair of a character. A lot of the equipment available in the game will be worn by the soldiers of the 4 major factions. These factions are the Holy Empire of Ovenia, a military order that usurped a crumbling empire through a civil war sparked by the latter allegedly having had the order's leader executed. The clans of Westmither, a loose confederation of tribes in the western part of the continent, living in and around a large forest that stretches for hundreds of miles. The Kingdom of Atisa, an ancient kingdom ruled by a handful of powerful dynasties that through continuous infighting take turns governing the realm. And last but not least, the free city of Brarerian, led by a council of magistrates that self-appoints its members from among the city's most influential families. Brarerian is, despite widespread corruption, the wealthiest city in the region, having withstood countless foreign invasions in the centuries past, not least thanks to its easily defensible position surrounded by mountains in the east and west and the sea to the north. The most recent conflict ultimately left the city and the region as a whole in shambles as all neighboring powers depleted their resources in what would later become known as the War of War. It is with this war as a backdrop that the game begins. After a peace deal is struck, the factions scramble to deal with the increase in bandit activity, all the while still scheming for power, making use of mercenaries and assassins to weaken their rivals. I've been using Wonderdraft to create some simple map ideas that I can use as a reference while developing the game and its setting. Since there's going to be a lot of story and lore, I'm organizing all of the world building on a website called World Anvil, where I can create articles for each faction, character, location, and so on. Finally, to organize the actual project and visually communicate with the artists, I use Milanote. Aside from the artists, I've also gotten some help from a creative writer who has done some work on fleshing out the factions and their backstories. So with all that out of the way, I'm gonna sit down and start writing the soundtrack for the game.
We're no strangers to love. You know the rules and so do I. A full commitment's what
I'm just kidding. I'm of course going to contact Red Forge, the creators of the Gladihoppers soundtrack, and while they work on that, I'll focus on the fight scene. Since this is undoubtedly the game's most important aspect, I want to develop it to an acceptable point before continuing with other areas of the game. I'll start by removing all the physics from the arms and from the head, and I'll make some new animations for them instead. I'll polish these up in the future, but I think they're an okay start. The weapons get scaled a bit during the attacks to add some 3-dimensionality to it. Finally, I've decided to keep the animation-driven physics in the legs for now, so that means that the body is currently made up of individual colliders for the legs and one collider for the torso. The hit detection therefore needs to be handled manually, so that's what I'll work on next. I ran into some issues with the hit detection. I'm trying to make it as versatile as possible, and so instead of just trying to code it, I decided to plan it out beforehand on Milanote. I'm still not a confident coder, so it's useful sometimes to visualize the architecture this way, even though most of this stuff is pretty obvious. I've now worked on the game for a little over a month since starting this video, and I'm pretty happy with how it's coming along. There's still lots to be done, but I'm going to end this devlog here and pick up in the next episode, so subscribe and stay tuned for that. Until then, take care and bye bye.